Welcome to our deep dive today. We're looking into a case study all about a pretty unsettling parasite.
Unsettling, but definitely fascinating.
Yeah, it involves a striped skunk down in Texas, infected with something called Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum.
Most people know it as the skunk cranial worm.
Right. And this study was published in the Journal of Veterinary Diagnostic Investigation. And get this parasite, it might be mistaken for something else, something pretty serious.
It's true. We always think of rabies with skunks, and it's a huge concern, of course. But this case, it shows us that there might be other things going on that cause skunks to act strangely.
So let's get into it. What exactly is this Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum, and what's it doing to these skunks?
Well, it's a kind of roundworm, a nematode. And it really likes to set up shop in the frontal sinuses of striped skunks.
Not exactly a friendly house guest, huh?
Not at all. It can cause all sorts of problems, neurological issues, even noticeable deformities in their skulls.
Now, the study mentions that it can be even worse for spotted skunks. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. While striped skunks are the main target, spotted skunks can also get infected, and the damage to their skulls. It can be a lot more severe in those cases.
That's kind of disturbing. So how does this even happen, the life cycle of this parasite? It sounds super complicated.
Well, it is. Figure 1 in the study, it lays it all out. But basically, the larvae, they start in the skunk species, then they make their way into a terrestrial gastropod, a snail. That's where they grow up.
Okay, so the snail's like the middleman.
Exactly. And from there, they can either be eaten directly by a skunk or they take a detour through what we call a paratenic host. Could be a frog, a snake, even a rodent, but they all eventually end up back in a skunk.
So the skunk eats an infected snail or one of these other animals, and that's how it gets infected.
Right. Once those larvae are inside the skunk, they molt a couple of times in the gut. Then they go on this crazy journey. They actually migrate through the intestinal wall and follow the peripheral nerves all the way to the central nervous system.
Hold on, they travel through the nerves. That's wild.
It is. And eventually they reach the brain. They even get through the cribriform plate, that bony structure that separates the brain from the nasal cavity. And finally, they make it to the frontal sinuses. That's where they become adults and start reproducing.
Wow, what a journey. Speaking of journeys, let's talk about this particular skunk in the Texas case study. What happened there?
So this was back in November of 2022. They found a disoriented skunk wandering around in the daytime in Deafness, Texas.
Which is unusual for a skunk, right? They're usually nocturnal.
Exactly. It's not normal behavior. So they euthanized it and sent the cranium in for rabies testing.
Makes sense. Skunks are known rabies carriers. So what did they find?
Well, the skunk did test positive for rabies, but while they were examining it, they found a bunch of these adult nematodes in the skull. More tests, including DNA analysis, confirmed that it was S. chitwoodorum.
So this skunk had both rabies and this cranial worm. What did the researchers do to confirm that?
They ran a whole bunch of tests. The rabies diagnosis, that was confirmed using a direct fluorescent antibody test.
That's the gold standard for rabies, right?
Yep. And then they did a histological exam, basically looked at the tissues under a microscope. They found lymphohistiocytic meningitis and chronic sinusitis, all consistent with a S. chitwoodorum infection.
Did they do any other tests?
They did. To rule out other things that might have been causing the skunk to act so weird, they tested for Toxoplasma gondii,
which is
another parasite. It can also cause neurological problems, but those test results came back negative.
Interesting. So we have a skunk with both rabies and a pretty serious parasitic infection. What does this mean, finding both of those things in this case?
Well, it just shows that skunks can carry more than one disease. They tested for rabies first, of course. But finding the S. chitwoodorum makes you wonder, could this parasite have been playing a role in the skunk's behavior even with the rabies?
You're saying the parasite itself could be making the skunk act disoriented.
That's the burning question. This case study doesn't totally tell us which is which, the effects of the rabies versus the parasite, but it definitely raises some interesting points.
Especially since this skunk was acting so strangely. Is there any evidence that this parasite, even without rabies, can cause changes in a skunk's behavior?
Actually, there is some evidence to suggest that. There was a study done in 2018 that found a high number of skunks with S. chitwoodorum, and they were all rabies negative. And guess what? They were acting strange too.
Okay, so it could be a factor. But how does the damage from this worm actually cause these behavioral changes?
Well, think about it. This parasite, it lives in the frontal sinuses, right up there in the skull near the brain. As those worms grow and reproduce, they really do a number on the bone and tissue around them. That can lead to neurological problems.
And that damage could be why that skunk in the study was out and about during the day, all confused.
Exactly. If a skunk's disoriented, it's more likely to get picked off by a predator, more likely to have accidents. It can even mess with their ability to, reproduce successfully.
Wow, so this parasite could have a real ripple effect on the whole skunk population.
That's what researchers are trying to figure out now.
You mentioned earlier that they tested for Toxoplasma gondii too. Why was that part of the study?
Toxoplasma gondii is another parasite that can infect all sorts of animals, including skunks, and in some cases, it can change their behavior. The researchers wanted to make sure it wasn't a factor in this skunk's weird behavior.
So it was sort of a process of elimination.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The test they used, it focused on brain tissue. And with skunks, it turns out that Toxoplasma gondii likes to hang out in the heart muscle more than the brain.
So they might not have gotten the full picture then, huh?
That's a possibility. Unfortunately, they only had the skull to work with in the study, so no heart tissue to test.
I see. So we have rabies, we have S. chitwoodorum, and maybe T. gondii. Anything else that could be contributing to this skunk acting so strangely?
Well, there's another one we should consider, canine distemper virus. It can also infect skunks, and it can cause symptoms that look a lot like rabies. Disorientation, seizures, paralysis, things like that.
So how do you tell the difference between distemper and rabies?
That would require some more specialized testing. But canine distemper, as serious as it is for animals, isn't zoonotic, meaning it can't jump to humans. Given the limited samples they had, the researchers really wanted to prioritize those zoonotic threats, rabies and T. gondii.
That makes sense. This deep dive, it really shows how complicated these interactions are between parasites, diseases, and animal behavior.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there's not always a simple explanation when an animal starts acting out of character. We have to look at all the possibilities.
So thinking about Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum and what it does to skunks, what are the big takeaways here? What have we learned from this case study?
Well, this study is just one piece of the puzzle, but it definitely highlights how skunks can carry multiple diseases, and some of those can affect how they behave. And that could increase the chances of skunks coming into contact with people.
And even though Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum itself can't spread to humans, finding it in this skunk, it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that skunks can carry other diseases that can, like rabies.
Right. We should always be careful around wildlife and do what we can to protect ourselves and our pets.
So this case study brings up a lot of questions about this parasite and how it might be connected to changes in skunk behavior.
It does. We can't say for sure, based on this case alone, whether S. chitwoodorum was a factor in this particular skunk's strange behavior. But other research suggests it could be, so it really underscores the need for more research in this area.
What kind of research do you think would be helpful to really get to the bottom of this?
Well, we need more studies that look at how common this parasite is in skunks, in healthy skunks, and in skunks showing signs of neurological problems. Comparing their behavior, those with the parasite and those without, that would tell us a lot.
And maybe some controlled lab studies would help too to see exactly what kind of behavioral changes this parasite causes.
Exactly. In a controlled setting, researchers can really focus on the parasite's effects without all the other factors you find in the wild.
And wouldn't it be interesting to see what happens over the long term? How does infection with this parasite affect a skunk's lifespan, its ability to reproduce, its overall health?
Absolutely. To really understand how this parasite impacts skunk populations, we need to know how it affects them in the long run.
It sounds like we still have a lot to learn about Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum and how it might be connected to skunk behavior.
We do. And these findings, they're important for both wildlife management and for public health.
This is a fascinating area of research with implications that go way beyond just skunks. So we've covered rabies, we've talked about S. chitwoodorum, and even touched on Toxoplasma gondii. It seems like figuring out what's making a skunk act strangely can be quite a puzzle.
Absolutely, especially when you're dealing with wild animals, their behavior can be influenced by so many different things.
Even with this skunk that tested positive for both rabies and S. chitwoodorum, we can't really say for sure which one, or if maybe both, caused that disorientation.
You're right. It's highly likely that rabies was the main culprit behind the skunk's behavior. But with everything we know about S. chitwoodorum and how it can impact behavior, we can't rule it out completely.
It seems like we need more research on S. chitwoodorum to really understand what it's doing, both on its own and alongside other factors.
I agree. More research would definitely help us figure out the full impact of this parasite, not only on skunk behavior, but also their overall health.
So where do we go from here? What kind of research would really help answer these questions?
Well, one thing we need is to build on those studies comparing skunks with and without the parasite, seeing how common it is, both in healthy skunks and those with neurological problems, and how their behavior differs. That kind of data would be extremely valuable.
What about doing those studies in a lab setting? Wouldn't that help isolate the specific behavioral changes caused by Skrjabingylus chitwoodorum?
That's right. A controlled environment like a lab would let researchers really hone in on the parasite's effects without all the other variables you'd find out in the wild.
And looking at the long-term effects of the parasite. How does it affect a skunk's lifespan, its chances of reproducing, and things like that?
That's another crucial piece of the puzzle. To truly grasp the impact of this parasite on skunk populations, we need to know how it affects their long-term survival and overall well-being.
This whole deep dive has really shed light on the world of parasites and their ability to influence animal behavior in ways we might not expect.
It just goes to show you that even tiny organisms can have a huge impact. It's a reminder that even in familiar animals like skunks, there are still mysteries for scientists to unravel.
And the more we understand these mysteries, the better equipped we are to protect both wildlife and ourselves. Any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Just to keep that sense of wonder alive, never stop asking questions, and always remember that every creature, big or small, has a story to tell.
Great advice. From Vet Neurojar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.